this video, I'm taking on the massive task of trying to read or watch all 14 of Shakespeare's comedy plays, which actually sounds like a lot to do, but I feel like what made me want to do this is that you can have conversations with other people who also like Shakespeare, and that's all well and good until I start name dropping plays, and then you're like, actually I don't know that one, and then they name drop another one and now you're like, I don't know that one either, and then it sort of alienates me from the whole concept of me liking Shakespeare, which it really shouldn't. Like, even if you read a scene and you like it, that should be valid, that's fine. Like, these plays were written hundreds of years ago, and I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to be able to understand everything and know everything about these plays straight away. So really this is completely also unnecessary, but also I feel like it would help me, because for context, if you don't know me, I'm an actor. I actually started in my youth theatre primarily looking at classical text and Shakespeare, and looking at it from the acting lens was something that really drew me to this kind of Shakespearean text a lot more, because before, when I was looking at it in English lessons and just looking at it on a page, I couldn't really connect with it, and it's only when I looked at it from a performance angle that I really connected with it a lot more. And I'm also interested in the comedies because I recently joined a comedy improv group, and I feel like it's really interesting to uncover the comedy within the comedies and find the opportunities as an actor and as a performer to really connect with the plays in this day and age. So in this video I want to talk about plot points, dated elements, fun facts about the plays, introduce you to the themes of the plays, introduce you to the characters, key moments, scenes that might be interesting to look into. Like, I just want to give you a little introduction. And for full transparency, I have actually started this task already as I'm filming this introduction, and all of my different debriefs are quite varied, so stay with this video, and if there's a specific play that you want to skip to, you can do that as well. But I just sort of wanted to give you a vibe and an introduction and some of the standout points that observing the play, reading the play, watching the play made me think as a modern actor and person. So I thought I'd take you through these plays, and also I might go through all 10 tragedies and all 10 histories as well, so please do subscribe and stay tuned for that. I mean, it takes a lot of time, but like, I feel like it would be so interesting to be able to look at all of them, and I actually know someone who has watched all of them. When I talked about this video idea, they have actually watched them all, so it's definitely possible, and I'm going to take you along the journey with me. And also, if you want to see the resources that I use to try and help me access and understand and watch these plays and read these plays, then I will link them all of the main ones below, because there's so many different ways that you can look into it, and it can also feel quite overwhelming, so I'm not expecting everyone to look at absolutely everything, but it's there if you want to see it. And with that, let me introduce you to all of Shakespeare's comedies. So I want to talk first about my absolute favourite Shakespeare play. I mean, at this point of filming, I don't know all of them, but it's Love's Labour's Lost, and I saw it at the RSC, Royal Shakespeare Company, and I feel like it's got so much potential, but it's not been performed as much. I think I've read because like the wordplay is quite dated and of its time, and there's a lot of different historical context about the society and international relations between different countries that means it was more difficult to access after that time, because it's a lot based on current affairs of the time. And I think also because it's not performed as often, people are less familiar with the characters and the storyline, so it's harder for people to follow compared to like your Midsummer Night's Dreams, your Macbeth, that people generally know a vague outline of what to expect. But I think it's so fun because you don't actually get that many plays covering those kind of themes, because it's covering men going celibate and committing to times of study and fasting, and like not just like intensely chasing women, and like those have a cultural significance today. Lots of people are like interested in fasting and studying and self-improvement, so taking those into settings where people can recognize them can really bring out the comedy, I think, from where I saw it, because they were having like a golf course and it was set on a tropical island where people were trying to find themselves, and there was characters vaping or on sunbeds, and like bringing modern references really brings it to life a bit more and brings it into another context, and you find the comedy through relating it to life today. People are able to connect with it easier, and I think it's just so fun. Like, lots of these different plays are about men chasing women and women reciprocating all the time, or just like men blindly just chasing women. I think the fact that it's about celibacy is such a unique kind of theme in plays, so I think there's a lot of potential to explore that within the play. So I feel like A Midsummer Night's Dream is one of the most popular Shakespeare plays to be put on, if not maybe the most regularly put on Shakespeare play, and I've seen it quite a few times outdoors, because I think there's a lot of outdoor free Shakespeare performances, and I feel like A Midsummer Night's Dream is a popular, well-known one. It's also one that lends itself quite well to an outdoor performance, because a lot of it's set in a forest, and it's quite magical because there's all of these different fairies and people trying to get these 4 young lovers together and matched up properly. So I think there's a lot to play with that, because you can make it really extravagant and magical and feel like real magic, or you can play it really dry and sort of underwhelming, and you can find the comedy within that. So I think that's a big opportunity creatively to decide where you want to place it when there is magic in a classical play, as a lot of them do have, but not all of them, so it's a nice opportunity for that. And there's also a play within a play, so you can explore that. As you may know already, but you might not, it's about 4 young lovers, and they're not like aligned in couples where they both like each other, like one likes the other but then the other doesn't, like one of those kind of love squares, I guess, and then it goes through many different versions of it all going wrong until it all goes well at the end, and everyone lives happily ever after, because that's what happens in the comedies. But I think it's interesting to explore from an acting perspective as well, because sometimes people are under real distress because the person you like doesn't like you back or whatever, or like there's all sorts of love complications that go on throughout the play. So it's interesting to play that, because do you want to play it as like a comedic thing, or do you want to play it as actually this is really serious and really devastating and none of this has worked out yet and none of this is the way I want it to be. Like, playing with how serious you want to take all of these different misunderstandings and things that go on in the play, and the fact that there's like someone who's got the head of a donkey. How do you want to play that? There's lots of different things that go on that you can use in the play, so it's a very interesting one. So All's Well That Ends Well is a play that I actually got to know quite well, because I used Helena's speech as my classical audition speech for the National Youth Theatre Rep Company second round. So I researched the play, read the play, watched versions of the play, and it's actually just so unhinged. Like, every plot point is so wild. Like, it's so unhinged that I spent a sizable amount of time telling my friends the entire plot points, because I'm like, listen to how unhinged this play is. Because this woman, Helena, she's young and she's liked this guy for ages, Bertram, who she's grown up in the court of, because her dad was a famous doctor and he passed away, so she was brought up like one of their own in that court. And then the king's unwell and this Bertram guy's going over there, and she thinks, oh, I could help the king because my dad was a doctor. So she goes to cure the king, and she's like, if I cure you, will you let me marry any of your men in the country? And he's like, yeah, sure. And then she's like, I want to marry Bertram. And then he runs away because he'd rather go to war than marry her. And it's one of the problem plays, because like, maybe it was okay, lots of marriages weren't really massively consensual back in the day, it was all sort of arranged for you, but looking at it now, like, it's very wrong, because she actually tricks him into sleeping with her so that she can be then like, oh, I'm pregnant, and he thinks that she's dead because she's made him and everyone believe that she's dead. So he's like, oh, maybe I did actually like her, and he's got all of these complex emotions, and then she appears at the end and she's like, oh, I'm pregnant with your child and I'm actually alive, and then he's meant to be happily married to her, but is he really happily married to her if he's like been tricked into sleeping with her? He's grieved and complexly like thought she was dead and had all of these weird feelings. Like, it's actually morally quite wrong. But the play is wild, and there's quite fun fights with this guy who just is boasting all the time. Parolers, I think his name is. His name is basically French for words, because he's just giving a lot of words. And he also gets tricked because he's trying to pretend to be really brave, but then they capture him and prove that actually like he's really weak, and they pretend to be the other side and they show how scared he really is. But that's an interesting commentary as well into the idea that men had to perform being these really masculine guys who weren't scared of anything, when really like war is scary. So it's interesting because you can play it as a joke, but also actually, why do men not be allowed to be vulnerable? Like, why is that a thing? So the next play I want to talk about is Much Ado About Nothing, and the first piece of information that I would like to share but feel like I can't outwardly say on the internet is that the title is actually a pun, but like an inappropriate pun, but because it's like a Shakespearean pun, not everyone gets it, so you're gonna have to look that up if you're really interested in knowing exact details on that. But if you do look it up, you better come back to this video and watch the rest of it, please and thank you, because I've sent you a way to find that information. You better come back again. But I just feel like, let's not go into depth explaining explicit puns on the internet. But I feel like Much Ado About Nothing is a play that initially I found quite more difficult to access compared to the other ones, if I'm being honest, because a lot of it is about characters getting tricked. So following the line of plot that each character thinks is going on versus the reality of what's actually going on tends to become quite complicated. But I saw a production of it which was 4 actors, and they're called the Handlebars is the company, and they cycle around doing tours of Shakespeare shows, and it's all multi-rolling, and that was quite fun. And I also read a few lines for a project where I was Beatrice, and basically there are 2 main couples, but sort of the focus is on Beatrice and Benedict, because they originally are insulting each other, hating each other, all of this kind of various different things go on to do with them disliking each other, and then they get tricked into thinking the other person's in love with them, and then they realise their love for each other, and then they get together, and that's that. So that's basically the plot, but because lots of people are getting tricked throughout, I just think it's a complicated one to approach because there's so many different things to follow. So this is Shakespeare's shortest play, so I've read it, and it's also one of his early plays, so it's interesting to see what his early work was like. But this is The Comedy of Errors, and The Comedy of Errors has a complicated, confusing plot that I will really try to explain to you as clearly as I can. So The Comedy of Errors is about 2 sets of twins, and the 2 rich twins are both called Antipholus, and the 2 poor twins both also have the same name, and they're bought to serve the rich twins for life, which is very questionable. But all of these little baby twins are all on a ship, and there's a shipwreck, and half of each set of twins grows up unaware of each other in different places. But the actual plot of The Comedy of Errors is about one half of each twin, so an Antipholus and Dromio, unknowingly end up visiting the place where the other Antipholus and Dromio ended up after the shipwreck. So there's a lot of confusion because no one knows that there's 2 versions of each of them. So everyone's confused, chaos happens, and that is the plot, and the comedy of the errors of that is what the play is. And there's actually a lot of puns in this play, which is interesting because I wonder how that always works and turns out, because some of them are working in the modern day and modern audiences will be able to understand them, but others are puns based on phrasing that we might not really use today, and they're continuously referenced throughout scenes. Also, some entire scenes are in rhyme, and actually I did do a monologue in youth theatre. I was given a monologue from this play to do, and it was all in rhyme, which I found interesting to perform because I don't want to cringe myself out sounding like I'm doing a spoken word piece but in a sort of weird way, because I'm sort of trying to make it also sound like natural, realistic dialogue, but it's in rhyme. So it's interesting creatively to see how you want to approach it and how much you want to emphasize the rhyme and how much just the rhyme is there. Also, in Act 2, Scene 1, there's a moment and like a monologue that reminds me of a lot of moments that you get in pantos, where they're like recapping events in a really fast-paced, quick way for comedic effect, because it's like, he said this and I said this and he said that and he said, like, that kind of thing. But instead of said, it's quoth, because that's what they say in Shakespeare times, apparently, for said. So he quoth he, quoth I. I think any of these kind of he said this, I said this kind of monologues is a great opportunity to really impersonate and mock the other character, and creating those kind of impersonating, mocking voices really creates a lot more comedy. But some of the comedy that I think is concerning in this play is that it does have slapstick, yes, that might have been acceptable in the day, but there's a lot of beating the servants and servant violence, and it never goes the other way, and the servants are actually expressing that they're in quite a lot of pain, and there's jokes surrounding that, which obviously to modern audiences is quite uncomfortable. And also there's a whole scene body shaming a woman, so there are quite a few different elements that don't really hold up too well today. So I've watched a play reading of The Merry Wives of Windsor online, I've read up online about it, and now it's time to chat about The Merry Wives of Windsor. So being honest, I feel like I was unsure how I felt about this play to start with, because the stakes are very low. They're all very comfortable, wealthy people having a bit of gossip, causing a light amount of drama and humiliation amongst themselves. And it's just a bit of fun, but it's not really a deep commentary about the human experience, unrequited love, no one's life's at stake. So I was like, I wasn't sure whether or not I'd like it as an actor, being involved in it. I thought, if I was ever involved or cast in this play, would I really feel fulfilled? Because the story doesn't go that far. But then I started to think about it more, and I think it's actually quite an empowering play for women, and that's what a lot of people say about it as well, because the story mainly follows these two rich wives who are aimed to be seduced for their money and taken advantage of. This guy Falstaff, who wants to have an affair with both women and take advantage of their money, and they decide to pair up together and string him along and just humiliate him and prank him as much as they can. So I feel like that's where the value is in the play, because it's about women guessing what they want. Like, the women in this play all achieve what they want to achieve, and they're much more intelligent than a lot of the men in the play, and they're outsmarting the men in the play. And I feel like that's where you can market this play. It's about female empowerment, and it's a fun little female empowerment story. But there is some xenophobia as well, which I don't like, with a Frenchman and a Welshman, like it's mocking them. So I don't like that, and I don't know how you really cut that out, remove that, and if it's appropriate really to just remove questionable elements of the play and still platform it, because I feel like that's a question with a lot of these plays, like, can you just remove questionable elements, act like it never happened, and still celebrate the play? I don't know. So I read in my research that actually the title As You Like It is widely considered to be an instruction from Shakespeare to his audience, because there's so much going on, there's so many different plot points, that there's something for everyone within the play, and you can take the play as you like it, which I thought was really interesting. And it's so true that the play has absolutely everything going on. Like, there's unrequited love, there's people giving away all their money to people, there's fights, there's wrestling matches, there's a lion attack, and there's people getting tricked because it's Shakespeare, and that seems to happen a lot. But something that I did realise, because I watched it in film format with my family, what I learned is that actually the challenges within that is that it could get quite confusing, because there are 4 couples, there are 2 sets of brothers that have rivalries, so just the vast amount of characters and storylines going on could make it a bit more confusing. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to perform it or read it or be involved with it in any kind of way. But I think the fact that I actually can watch it in film format does say a lot about the play, because lots of these plays aren't available in film format. But I went on BBC iPlayer, and there's actually 2 different versions of As You Like It, the film, that I could watch, because I think it lends itself quite well to screen, because it's quite cinematic, because it's mostly set in the woods and there's also some scenes in the court, so it's quite cinematic in that kind of way. And also the dialogue is quite natural, and there's a lot of different storylines that are very relatable about the human experience, and the emotions are so high. I don't know if it's just because the acting was really good and it felt really connected and really real, but it's expressing in such beautiful poetry such deep human feelings about being willing to die and having deep rivalries and unrequited love and being in love, and so much about the human experience is conveyed in such a philosophical, beautiful, poetic way. But there's also such witty interactions, like it feels so natural, and some scenes feel so funny, like Act 3, Scene 2 I've got written down is actually really funny. There's an interaction where Orlando's talking about Rosalind and someone's like, I don't like her name, and then he's like, well, I don't think they were really thinking about your opinion on it when they named her. Like, it's just like Shakespeare banter. Like, the conversations feel real. Also, there are some really famous Shakespearean moments in this play. That All the World's a Stage speech is in this play. And also the character Rosalind, who's widely considered to be one of the strongest female characters in the kind of cinematic universe, I guess, of Shakespeare, because she dresses up as a boy in the woods and then is like using her kind of male privilege to really test the guy who says that he loves her, and really check that he does and check that he'll treat her right and all of this. But it is weird, because I feel like if someone had stated they were in love with me and then couldn't recognise me when I'm dressed as a boy in the woods, I would be like, why are you not still obsessed with me when I'm dressed as a boy in the woods? Why do you not recognise me? You clearly don't like me enough. So I would be a bit fuming about that personally, but I think it's all part of like suspending your belief for the point of the story, and the woods as a setting, I've heard, is always meant to be quite magical, and the situations that happen are quite surreal. Like you think of A Midsummer Night's Dream, everything that happens there is a bit surreal in the woods. So I feel like that's fine, and it's all part of the fun of the plot. And also, why is everyone falling in love at first sight? Like, they don't even say anything to each other and they're like, I'm in love. Like, it feels a bit shallow maybe, but I think it's part of the comedy and the entertainment. And also, I read someone was saying online that it's sort of an iconic play because everyone's just running away from a bad government and they're all hiding in the forest, and it's all people who have either been banished or are running away, and they're all interacting in the woods because they don't want to go back to court. And I think that's kind of iconic. So The Tempest was actually a play that I studied in Year 8, but I decided to watch a version of it online as well to recap, because Year 8 was a long time ago for me. But what I remembered The Tempest as is I thought it was quite a more child-centred, family-friendly play, where there's a lot of magic. Prospero uses his magic to cause a storm to crash all the people he's upset with onto the island because he wants revenge, but he instead learns that it's better to forgive them. There's young love between Ferdinand and Miranda, and the fact that there's a lot of magic and a lot of spirits means that lots of adaptations have a lot of music and dance, and they can go quite wild with the set design and the lighting design, and they can take it in quite abstract, fun ways. So I thought it's just a nice Shakespeare for kids to access. And then I watched it and I researched it, and I realised that actually there are many much darker elements to it, because Prospero is exiled from where he used to live, and he ends up going to this island, and he's the main character, and he's sort of trying to have power over and control and treat badly the indigenous population of the island. So there's quite heavy themes of colonialism, which is very uncomfortable with that coming from the main character who we're meant to see the viewpoint of. Like, that all feels very uncomfortable. And also Caliban, let's say, has bad intentions with what he wants to do to Miranda. So I thought maybe we just need to cancel it. Like, maybe it's not really appropriate to be like platforming those kind of things. But then the more I researched, the more I realised that many people interpret it as Shakespeare's critique of these things and critique of the colonialism that was going on a lot at the time. So I thought maybe with the presentation of colonialism and the mistreatment of the indigenous population, maybe presenting something on stage doesn't necessarily imply support, but just in representing these uncomfortable truths about real life problems and situations going on in the world, maybe that's how we get people to observe just how bad what is going on in the world is, and it can encourage people to take action and to morally reflect on the situations in the world. And also, Trinculo, Stefano and Caliban spend a large portion of this play drunk on wine, so I think creatively that's a very fun element of the play. So The Winter's Tale is one of Shakespeare's later plays, so as a result of that it's quite a lot more experimental with regards to genre. It's considered to be a play of two halves, with the first half being really tragic, dark, sad, and the second half being a lot more light, comedic. There's romance in it, and there's also loads of singing, which I think is so fun and iconic. And there are quite a few people who consider it to be a problem play because the genre is so mashed up, but I think it's actually really clever to take all these tragic circumstances that everyone believes to be true and all these events that people have thought happened in the first half, and to just flip it and to make an entirely different second half, tonally different, like to throw the audience in that kind of way and to subvert their expectations and to have lots of events that they believe to have happened to actually be not the case in the second half is really clever and a really interesting journey to take an audience on. So in the first half, the king Leontes' friend is staying, and he wants his friend to stay longer, and his friend is a king of another place, so he's like, I really need to get back, I've got duties, responsibilities. So he asks his wife, he's like, please convince my friend to stay a week longer. So she does, successfully, and then suddenly he flips and he's really jealous and he's really paranoid and convinced that they're having an affair, because he's like, why would my friend say yes to my wife when I asked him to stay longer and he wouldn't say yes to me? So he becomes paranoid. Everyone knows that she's not having an affair. She's a very respected woman, and he's convinced that his wife Hermione is having an affair, and he allows his jealousy to mean that he puts his wife in prison. His newborn daughter, he sends her to be abandoned in the wilderness where she's likely to be killed by wild animals. And actually that's where the famous line, if you've ever heard the stage direction from Shakespeare, exit pursued by a bear, that's why that line's used, because the people who abandon this baby in the wilderness then get pursued by a bear and mauled to death. So that's where that famous line comes from. It's very dark. He's destroying his whole family because of his jealousy, and he also gets quite unhinged because he turns to the audience and he's like, your wife sitting next to you, she could be cheating on you with your neighbour. And I think it's quite unhinged but interesting to explore. I think it's really interesting to explore those feelings of jealousy. And also there's a court scene because his wife Hermione's in prison and she gets taken to court to be put on trial for this potential affair. And even though her heart is broken, her marriage has been torn apart, she articulates herself so well. Other women in the community articulate themselves very well as well. So there's quite a lot of strong female monologues within this play. And then the second half is a lot more lighter. However, this daughter who was abandoned ends up being brought up in a lower class shepherd family, and there's a lot of comments about the fact that she seems too pretty to be lower class and from a shepherd family, which I think is quite prejudiced and quite uncomfortable, and I feel like that wouldn't really be the way that we'd approach those kind of class discussions in plays today. So Two Gentlemen of Verona is, as the name suggests, about two gentlemen, both from Verona, and they both go to visit Milan, and they both fall in love with the same woman and both try to pursue her. Apart from that, one of these men has a girlfriend at home who he's made promises to, he's written love letters to, he's exchanged rings with, he's made commitments to, and suddenly he sees a new woman, his best friend's girl, who has absolutely no interest in him, and he's like, oh, my love to this previous girl is dead. And to be honest, these kind of themes and this kind of storyline surprised me, because I thought that back in the day they'd have one long committed marriage and they're a bit more conservative in that kind of scenario. And actually I just thought it was more of a modern dating phenomenon, that people would betray their best friend and try and steal their best friend's girl, and they would lie to women and have their head turned so fast. I thought that wouldn't have happened so much, but apparently that's been happening for hundreds of years. So I feel like it's quite triggering to see such toxic male behaviour, because he actually tries to assault the girl who's not interested in him, and then he finally manages to rekindle his friendship with his best friend, and his best friend offers the girl to him as some kind of reconciliation act, which is really uncomfortable, because they're sort of seeing women as commodities, because obviously she doesn't like him, she doesn't want to be with him, so why would you offer a girl that you like to be with a man who she doesn't want to be with? And I found it quite triggering to see such negative male behaviour presented so accurately, and I feel like the entire play just put me in a bit of a bad mood, to be honest. But other than that, it's really quite funny. Like, there's a lot more of a feature on the servants in this play, and there's a lot more sort of banter between the servants and the people they work for. And one of the servants has a monologue where he's got his two shoes and he's recreating how he said goodbye to his family and his parents before he went to Milan. So he's reenacting his emotional farewell to his parents as he goes on this work trip to Milan, with his parents being his shoes that he's taken off and put in his hands. So he's a bit of like sort of a clown kind of character, and there's a lot of comedy and wordplay going on. And I've read it's actually the only Shakespearean play where one of the characters is a dog, and there's a dog that features in it quite a few times. So I feel like that's so fun, and once you know that, it's really fun to be able to explore that element. So a large portion of The Merchant of Venice is actually about loans, but it's also about love, courtship, and contains a lot of anti-Semitism, including what may have been believed to be at the time a happy ending, where they force conversion on a Jewish man called Shylock, and they make him convert to Christianity and leave behind his culture, and that's meant to be a happy ending. But really, nothing's a happy ending if you're forcing someone to get rid of their culture and their identity and force them to be something that they're not and they don't want to be. It's also considered to be a more unusual Shakespearean comedy because there's less of the comedic tropes like joke characters and slapstick and all of those kind of features. It's not really like a joking around kind of play, but it's not considered a tragedy because lots of characters get married and have a happy ending. There are quite a lot of weird scenes, I would say, as well, because, for example, this woman, Portia, in order to choose her husband, she's got 3 caskets, and all the men have to pick one, and if it's got her portrait in the casket, then they win her and she marries them, and if not, they have to just leave. And that is a bit of an odd kind of plot point, but I guess maybe it was more common to have those kind of courtship type situations back in the day. Also, in the court scenes surrounding the loans, Portia and Nerissa actually dress up as men and go to the court and sort everything out, and no one knows that it's them initially because they're really in disguise, but they manage to sort out the situation, which is really considered in many ways quite unusual historically, to have empowered, powerful female characters who are intelligent and in control. Also, something that I've read about that I don't know whether or not I was aware of originally was that there's a lot of different adaptations that interpret Antonio and Bassanio to be in love, and I didn't know that there was that much gay representation in Shakespeare, and it's very much debated because apparently back in the day men were a lot more open with their emotions and would express their love for their male friends as well, so deep male friendship was more of a thing. It could be just a bromance, people say, or it could be genuine love because Antonio is willing to risk his life for Bassanio, and they have quite a nice little heartfelt conversation and moment in the court. So I learned in my research that Twelfth Night is actually called Twelfth Night because it was designed to be performed on the 12th night of Christmas. So it's meant to be a play that's performed at that fun, festive time of year. So it's got a lot of disguises, mistaken identity, and also love. And the ending does seem quite far-fetched of a conclusion, but I think we're sort of meant to accept that as an audience because it's just a fun, festive, magical kind of conclusion to all of these different random things that are going on. So it's like the Christmas film of Shakespearean times, I guess. But I personally feel like underneath all of that there are quite a few different sensitive moments. Like there's a character called Olivia who has declined all suitors for 7 years because she's lost family members, and that feeling of struggling to feel like you're ready to find love after grief is a really relatable kind of sensitive human experience. And there's also quite a lot of interesting commentary about gender roles and the differences in how men and women love, and Viola in disguise is saying that she believes that women can still love the same amount that men do, and maybe they love more constantly. So I think Viola is very much an example of a strong woman, and so is Olivia. Like, I feel like there's a lot of strong female characters in this play. And the play as a whole is about twins, Viola and Sebastian, and they get shipwrecked and separated, and Viola dresses up as a man in order to be able to work as a man and have a job and earn money because she's on her own. So it's an interesting gender role reversal kind of play, and it's all about how they interact after the shipwreck, and then they find each other again and they find love. And it's all about the servants as well as quite a lot of servant drama, and there's quite a few different fights in the play based on these mistaken identities. There's a few different songs, which is quite fun, and there's also a drunk uncle in the play, which is interesting. It's also widely considered to be maybe his most prominently LGBTQ play for many different reasons. Firstly, because Viola spends most of the play presenting as a man Cesario, so that exploration of gender roles and the way that means that you interact differently with society and explore different qualities that would be considered more masculine within yourself, and exploring that kind of gender fluidity is considered quite LGBT. Also, there's a lot of different love triangles, and within that there's some kind of representation as well that's often found, especially in more modern adaptations, because Olivia falls in love with Viola when Viola is the man Cesario, so that is obviously more kind of like not your typical straight love. And also Antonio is the captain who rescues Sebastian from the shipwreck, and after that they have quite a lot of love expressed for each other and loyalty, and they're willing to, like, Antonio is willing to risk his safety in order to defend who he believes is Sebastian in a fight. So that kind of intense love and loyalty is considered to potentially be more than just platonic love for each other. So I think almost everyone hates The Taming of the Shrew because it is based on a very misogynistic premise about taming a woman into becoming an obedient wife. Basically, the story is centered around two daughters of this rich man, and they're both beautiful. However, the oldest daughter, Katharina, she's got a temper on her, and she's outspoken, and she has a personality. And the younger daughter, Bianca, is described as being a young, modest girl and mild. So all of these men want to marry her, but she's not allowed to be seeing any men until her oldest sister is married off. So this oldest daughter, Katharina, gets married off to this incredibly abusive man who deprives her of food and sleep until she becomes more obedient. He's making her call the sun the moon because she has to submit to his version of reality and become fully obedient. And at the end of the play, is it meant to be a kind of moral play? We don't really know, where it's like, oh, after all, she's the most obedient out of all the wives. And Shakespeare is quite widely known for having quite strong female characters, so lots of people see this play as being quite confusing and out of character for him, but some people interpret it to be more satirical and it's not meant to be taken as a serious play. But it just doesn't sit right with a lot of people, and the way that women are talked about in this play is quite objectifying. But I have actually seen in my research that a lot of different modern pieces that are quite famous and known are based on the story of The Taming of the Shrew, such as the musical Kiss Me Kate is based on The Taming of the Shrew, and also the film 10 Things I Hate About You is based on The Taming of the Shrew as well. So it's had quite a lot of impact and inspiration for a lot of more modern pieces of art, I guess. So Measure for Measure is another one of Shakespeare's problem plays, because despite it being defined as a comedy, and yes, comedy meant something different in Shakespeare's day, it was just a play where the characters get married at the end, but Measure for Measure was very unexpected for me, and it feels very different to a lot of his other comedies in tone, because it's incredibly dark and incredibly tragic. And there is some comedy in this play, because the Duke spends a lot of the time in disguise, and the audience know this, which means that like having a secret with the audience provides a lot of opportunities for comedy. Like the Duke in disguise as a friar says, "I love the Duke as I love myself," so everyone in the audience will have a little moment with that, and that's a little moment of comedy because he's saying stuff that's like, the audience know he's the Duke, he knows he's the Duke, but no one else does. There's also a lot of like really kind of like spicy, kind of like inappropriate jokes. Like, I don't know how to explain the type of humour that I'm trying to explain on the internet. It's something that people sometimes forget about Shakespeare, because lots of people who don't know that much about Shakespeare think it's all very like high level, serious, intense, intimidating, but really like he's making jokes about someone's urine at one point. But I feel like it's really in this play's dark tone that Shakespeare really stands strong as a female ally and gets his reputation for doing so in this play, amongst obviously other plays as well, have built up his reputation. But Isabella is such a strong female character, she has such strong monologues throughout the play, and this story centres around Claudio, who when the Duke goes away, he's actually in disguise and he's watching over all of these events, but when the Duke goes away and leaves Angelo in charge, Angelo sentences Claudio to death because he's got someone pregnant out of wedlock, even though he intends to marry her. He's just sort of trying to set an example because there's a lot of brothels, and he's trying to police the whole situation and take the moral high ground. And Claudio is Isabella's brother, so Isabella is a nun, and she hears about this and she goes to plead to Angelo for Claudio, her brother's life. And because she's a very beautiful woman and she's very like expressive in that, and she uses that to her advantage in like being persuasive and like an attractive young woman, like that's what Angelo is drawn to. And he basically says, if you sleep with me, I'll spare your brother's life. And she's like, I'm going to tell everyone what you've said to me. And he says, who will believe thee, Isabel? And he goes on and on about like how it's her unkindness in turning him down that will mean that her brother's death will be dragged out, which is like really hard hitting, because I feel like this is a narrative that happens a lot even now. Like, so many situations women find themselves in, it's either men or women internally telling themselves that no one will believe them. And it's so sad that all these hundreds of years later this is still something that's so relevant. But the fact that Shakespeare puts it so clearly and so directly on stage is so powerful. So many women across many hundreds of years, like maybe even a majority of women, have been in a situation at some point where a man in a position of power has made them feel uncomfortable, but he's got a reputation and he's telling us that he's got a reputation, or like she knows he's got a reputation. And women have been stuck in that issue for years, and exploring the kind of emotional burden that weighs on women is something that I think is so powerful to put in front of audiences. And this play is quite famous for its morally complicated, uncomfortable ending, because basically the Duke, when he's disguised as the friar, he orchestrates everything so that actually Claudio, the brother, survives. However, he's not told Isabella this, and as soon as he tells Isabella for this, like, her mind must be racing so much, she's been through so much, and then he asks to marry her, and some people are like, oh, that's a nice ending, because he's a rich man and he does say, what's mine is yours. However, if you think about what a nun wants, a nun is committing to a spiritual life, a life of poverty, and a life where you're committing to God, and you don't want a man. Like, you don't want a rich man, you don't want a poor man, you don't want any man. That kind of ending entirely disregards what she wants. So I think in many ways he is just seeing a vulnerable woman and he's helping her in order that she will feel in his debt afterwards. Is he platforming these opinions and trying to be supportive in order for him to be predatorial in the end? Like, I feel like it's a common problem where, like, the person you turn to in a situation as a woman, you might have a bit of a blindness towards their toxic traits towards you, because you're like, this person's helping me from this toxic person, whereas really, what are their intentions? Why are they helping you? And that's something that you have to be wary of as a woman in order to keep safe. So now I've read, listened to, watched all 14 of these comedy plays, so I thought it's about time for a debrief on this process. And I feel like I love the fact that I've done this, because whenever anyone mentions anything to do with Shakespeare, I'm like, name a comedy to me and I will know it. And it's incredibly exciting actually, because before, like, there's so many plays that it's so hard to find one that you know in common with other people. So I actually have loved doing this. However, I feel sort of overwhelmed with knowledge, and I'm wondering, like, in 6 months' time, in a year's time, how much will I know? But I am glad overall that I have the foundation in all these different plays, because I think if an audition comes up, and an audition did come up, I just didn't get invited in the room for it in the end, but like, if an audition comes up for one of these plays, then I will be able to have that foundation in that play already. So I think it's so much more useful than I ever thought it would be. And I feel like something that people might ask me is, how long did this take me to go through 14 plays? So firstly, I think 3 of them were plays that I had researched and done enough already that I didn't feel like I needed to do any additional research on. But for the 11 plays, it's taken me just under 2 months. If you did this and it took you slower, or like you don't really need to compare your time to anyone else's. Like, just do what you want when you want, and it can take as long as you like, and that's fine, really. But I would say, please don't put too much pressure on yourself to understand everything straight away, because it is complicated language, and I was using like scene by scene summaries sometimes if I was watching a film version, or summaries of an act, so I could read ahead and understand the plot so I could follow along better. And also I would listen to audiobooks sometimes of it, and then I'd also read along with a live line by line translation that I'd find online as well, to make sure that I was understanding everything as I was like going through the play. And also play readings, as well as play readings online where people do discussions on the play beforehand or after with the actors. If I had an opinion or a thought, I'd Google it and I'd read online other people's thoughts on the plays, because I think it's interesting to understand lots of different perspectives and nuances on different moments that you might be like, what's going on here? Like, there's so many different resources and opinions and thoughts online and forums about different Shakespeare plays, so just use them. And other things that I'd recommend, that I think if you're looking into a specific play, that I think can really inform your understanding of it, is knowing where in the order of Shakespeare's plays that specific play goes, because his early plays are very different stylistically to his later plays where he's more experimental. So knowing where it stands within that kind of line of plays is really helpful, and also knowing about Shakespeare's life experience and what was going on in his life at that point and how that informed what he wrote is really helpful. And for example, The Tempest is considered to be potentially his last play, so it's sort of Shakespeare's goodbye to theatre. So knowing that can also really help inform and enhance your understanding of the play. And also, they're all set in various different places across Europe, and I don't know if Shakespeare even travelled to all these different places, but loads of them are set in Italy. There's Measure for Measure is set in Vienna, and Vienna was going through a time where there was a lot of brothels, so understanding that and the cultural context of that, or understanding that Athens is where A Midsummer Night's Dream is set, and that's connected to like the Greek gods and mythology and that kind of thing. So I feel like the settings and their reputation really affect the vibe of the play, so knowing that's helpful. Also, a feature of Shakespeare's plays that I didn't mention, but that occurs in a lot of his plays, 11 of his plays in total and 4 of his comedies, are the epilogues. And I feel like it's very different to the style of modern theatre today, when often we don't address the audience so much like at the end of a play or at the start of a play, like we're not directly speaking to the audience. But I feel like that's really interesting creatively to explore that, because I feel like we've become more and more a kind of theatre culture where we're like, this is the show that we're presenting to you, unless we're sharing a moment and a story with you in this space right now. And also something that I'd like to share is that since I told someone that I was doing this, I was given this book, which I've skimmed through. I've not read it fully, but I feel like it feels quite conversational compared to some of the books where it's quite difficult to read. This doesn't feel so difficult to read, and it's a book about acting the comedies, which I think will be interesting to read now that I've gone through all of the comedies. So those are my thoughts on all of the comedies, but if you've read, even if you've just read one of the comedies or seen one of the comedies, let's debrief in the comments. Let me know any thoughts on the tragedies and histories as well, because I might move on to them next. Let me know if there's any other kind of Shakespeare content you'd like to see from me, and please subscribe, because this took a lot of time and effort and I would really appreciate that. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!